The champagne fountain sparkled under crystal chandeliers as 310 wedding guests celebrated my sister Catherine's perfect reception. Mom raised her glass, beaming with pride, delivering her toast about Catherine finding her soulmate. The Palmer House Hilton ballroom buzzed with laughter and congratulations. When Mom finished, she turned to me with those gleaming eyes I knew so well. "When's your turn, sweetheart?" she asked, expectation dripping from every word. My response shattered the moment, like thunder. "7 months ago, Mom. You were invited. Your favorite daughter threw the invitation in the trash." Silence fell across our corner of the reception. Catherine's face drained of all color. The champagne glass slipped from Mother's trembling fingers, crystal exploding across the marble floor. 8 months earlier, my life felt like it was finally falling into place. I was working as an architectural engineer in Portland, Oregon, designing sustainable commercial buildings for a growing firm downtown. Every morning, I stopped at Grind Coffee on Southeast Division for my usual Americano before heading to the office. That's where I first noticed Emily Thompson. She was always there before me, sitting by the window with medical journals spread across her table, highlighting passages with intense focus. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and she had this gentle way of smiling at the barista that made everyone around her feel at ease. After 3 weeks of stealing glances, I finally worked up the courage to ask if she minded sharing the community newspaper. Emily turned out to be a pediatric nurse at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. She had moved to Portland 2 years earlier from a small town in rural Idaho to pursue her dream of working with children facing serious illnesses. Our first conversation lasted 2 hours. She told me about growing up on her family's potato farm, how she learned compassion watching her grandmother care for sick neighbors, and why she chose pediatrics over more lucrative nursing specialties. I found myself completely captivated by her authenticity. Emily didn't try to impress anyone. She talked about her patients with such tenderness, describing how she helped frightened kids feel brave during treatments. When she laughed, it was genuine and warm, nothing like the calculated social performances I'd grown up witnessing in my Chicago family. Our courtship unfolded naturally over 6 months. We hiked the Columbia River Gorge on weekends, exploring waterfalls and talking for hours about our hopes for the future. Emily introduced me to farmers' markets, teaching me to select the ripest peaches and explaining how different soil conditions affected vegetable flavors. I showed her the architectural details of Portland's bridges, describing the engineering challenges each designer faced. Emily's apartment was filled with handmade quilts from her grandmother and photographs of her extended family back in Idaho. She kept a small garden on her balcony where she grew herbs for cooking. Everything about her life reflected thoughtfulness and care. She volunteered at a literacy program for immigrant families on Thursday evenings and spent Saturday mornings reading to children at the public library. I realized I was falling in love watching her interact with a scared 7-year-old boy during a hospital visit she invited me to observe. The child was scheduled for surgery the next day, and his parents spoke limited English. Emily sat on the floor beside his bed, using picture books and gentle gestures to explain what would happen. She made him laugh by drawing silly faces on medical gloves and turning them into balloon animals. When his fear finally melted away, I knew Emily was the woman I wanted to spend my life with. The proposal happened at Multnomah Falls during the spring snowmelt in April. We had hiked the trail to the upper viewing platform, and Emily was photographing the rushing water cascading down the rocky cliff face. The mist created tiny rainbows in the afternoon sunlight. I pulled out my grandfather's simple gold band, a ring that had been passed down through 3 generations of men in my family. Emily's eyes filled with tears as I explained how my grandfather had proposed to my grandmother with that same ring beside Lake Michigan in 1947. She said yes while water thundered around us, and we held each other as other hikers applauded from nearby observation points. We decided on an intimate ceremony for 50 guests at the Portland Rose Gardens Botanical Conservatory. Emily wanted to make all the decorations herself, using flowers from local farmers and ribbons in soft earth tones that matched the natural surroundings. She spent evenings after her hospital shifts creating centerpieces and planning a menu featuring Pacific Northwest ingredients. I was excited to share our news with my family back in Chicago. My parents had moved there when I was 12, after Dad got promoted to regional manager for his manufacturing company. My sister Catherine was 3 years older and had always been the star of our family. She graduated valedictorian from Northwestern University and worked in marketing for a prestigious consulting firm downtown. When I called Mom to announce the engagement, her response felt lukewarm. She asked about Emily's education, her family background, and whether we were sure we wanted to rush into marriage after such a short courtship. When I mentioned the wedding date, Mom sighed and talked about the expense of traveling to Portland and how challenging it would be to arrange time off work. Dad got on the line briefly to offer congratulations, but I could hear the television in the background and sensed his distraction. Catherine was apparently busy with her own romantic situation and couldn't come to the phone. I hung up feeling disappointed but told myself that family dynamics were always complicated during major life changes. Emily addressed our wedding invitations by hand, writing each family member's name in her careful script. She insisted on including a personal note to my parents, mentioning how eager she was to meet them and become part of their family. We mailed the invitations 3 months before the ceremony, giving everyone plenty of time to make travel arrangements. As weeks passed without any response from my family, I started feeling anxious. I called several times, leaving messages asking about their plans for attending the wedding. Mom always seemed rushed when she did answer, mentioning work deadlines and social commitments that were keeping her busy. Dad's responses were even more brief, usually just saying they were looking into flights and would get back to me soon. Catherine never returned my calls at all. When I finally reached her at her office, she claimed to be swamped with a major client presentation and promised to call back that evening. She never did. This pattern continued for weeks, with my family seeming increasingly distant and evasive. Emily tried to stay positive, suggesting maybe they were planning some kind of surprise for the wedding. She reminded me that some families showed affection differently, and that my parents were probably just private people who preferred to express emotions through actions rather than words. 2 weeks before our ceremony, I made one final attempt to nail down their attendance. I called Mom during her lunch break, catching her at home where she couldn't use work as an excuse to cut the conversation short. "Mom, I really need to know if you're coming to the wedding," I said. "Emily's finalizing the catering count, and we need to give final numbers to the venue." "Oh, honey, of course we want to be there," she replied, but something in her voice sounded uncertain. "It's just been such a busy time with Catherine's engagement party coming up." My stomach dropped. "Catherine's engaged? When did that happen?" 3 weeks ago. Didn't she call you?" Travis Hamilton proposed at the Chicago Yacht Club. "He's from such a wonderful family, Roger. His father owns Hamilton Investment Partners. They're planning the most beautiful wedding for next spring." I felt completely blindsided. My sister had gotten engaged and nobody had bothered to tell me. While I was trying to include my family in my wedding celebration, they were apparently planning Catherine's engagement party. "Mom, what about my wedding invitation? Did you get it?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mom spoke again, her voice carried genuine confusion. "What wedding invitation, honey? You never sent us anything." My wedding day arrived with clear skies and the scent of roses drifting across the botanical conservatory. Emily looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, which she had altered herself to fit perfectly. The ceremony should have been one of the happiest moments of my life, but the empty section reserved for my family cast a shadow over everything. Emily's father, a soft-spoken potato farmer named Bill Thompson, walked me down the aisle since my own family wasn't there to fulfill that tradition. His weathered hands were gentle as he placed my hand in Emily's, and his eyes conveyed the warmth that my own parents should have shown. Emily's relatives filled the left side of the conservatory, their genuine smiles and tears of joy, highlighting the absence from my side even more starkly. Our wedding photographer, a talented woman named Sarah Chen, discreetly captured the empty chairs with white ribbons where my family should have been sitting. During the reception, she approached me privately and offered to edit those sections out of our final album, but I told her to leave them. I wanted an honest record of what had happened. Emily cried quietly during our first dance, not from happiness, but from heartbreak over my family's absence. She had been so excited to meet my parents and sister, planning special conversations about my childhood and hoping to build relationships that would last decades. Instead, she was left wondering what she had done wrong to make them reject our invitation. After our honeymoon in the Oregon coast, I called Catherine repeatedly, desperate for explanations about the missing invitation. Each conversation felt more frustrating than the last. Catherine claimed she never received anything in the mail, suggesting problems with the postal service or incorrect addressing. She seemed genuinely puzzled by my accusations, which made me question my own memory of mailing the invitations. "Roger, I swear to you, nothing came to my apartment," Catherine insisted during one particularly heated phone call. "Maybe Emily put the wrong address on the envelope? These things happen all the time." But I knew Emily had double-checked every address against the contact information I provided. She was meticulous about details, especially for something as important as our wedding invitations. The idea that she had made addressing mistakes for my entire family seemed impossible. Desperate for answers, I hired a private investigator named Marcus Rivera, who specialized in tracking mail delivery issues. Marcus was a former postal inspector with 30 years of experience investigating mail fraud and delivery problems. He assured me that modern tracking systems would provide clear evidence of what happened to our invitations. Within 2 weeks, Marcus presented me with comprehensive delivery records. Every invitation had been successfully delivered to the correct Chicago addresses. The Postal Service had electronic signatures confirming receipt at each location, including timestamps and GPS coordinates. There was no question that my family had received their invitations exactly as Emily had addressed them. Armed with this evidence, I flew to Chicago for an unscheduled confrontation with Catherine. I didn't warn her I was coming, instead showing up at her Lincoln Park apartment on a Saturday morning when I knew she would be home. Catherine answered the door in yoga clothes, clearly surprised to see me standing in her hallway. "Roger, what are you doing here? You should have called first." I pushed past her into the apartment, my anger finally boiling over after months of confusion and hurt. Catherine's place was elegant and expensive, decorated with modern furniture and original artwork that reflected her success in the marketing world. Everything was perfectly arranged, which made what I discovered next even more shocking. In Catherine's bedroom, I found pieces of our wedding invitation scattered in her wastebasket. The cream-colored cardstock was torn into small fragments, but enough remained to clearly identify Emily's careful handwriting and the rose-pattern border we had selected together. I gathered the pieces with trembling hands while Catherine watched from the doorway. "How could you do this?" I demanded, holding the torn invitation toward her. "How could you destroy something so important to me?" Catherine's initial reaction was denial, claiming she had no idea how those pieces ended up in her trash. She suggested maybe her cleaning lady had accidentally thrown away mail, or perhaps the invitation had gotten damaged, and she was planning to contact me about requesting a replacement. But her explanations sounded increasingly desperate and unconvincing. Finally, under the pressure of my persistent questioning and the undeniable physical evidence, Catherine broke down. She collapsed onto her bed, covering her face with her hands as tears began flowing. "I couldn't let you make such a terrible mistake," she sobbed. "Emily's not right for our family, Roger. She's from rural Idaho, barely educated, works as a nurse. Mom has such high hopes for you. She talks constantly about you finding someone from a good family, someone with proper connections who can help your career." I stared at my sister in disbelief. The woman I had looked up to my entire childhood had deliberately sabotaged one of the most important events of my life because she considered my wife inferior to her social standards. "Emily has a college degree and works in one of the most demanding medical fields," I said. "She saves children's lives every day. What about her background could possibly make you think she's not good enough?" Catherine wiped her eyes with a tissue, but her expression remained stubborn. "You don't understand how things work, Roger. Marriage isn't just about feelings. It's about building a future, creating connections, advancing your position in society. Emily comes from potato farmers, for heaven's sake. She'll never fit in with the kind of people you should be associating with." "You mean people like Travis Hamilton and his investment banker family?" "Exactly. Travis can help my career in ways you couldn't imagine. His father has connections throughout Chicago's business community. When I marry him, it will open doors for our entire family. But if you're married to someone from Emily's background, it reflects poorly on all of us." I realized that Catherine wasn't just protecting some abstract family reputation. She was protecting her own social climbing ambitions by preventing me from making what she considered a marriage beneath our family's aspirations. Her action wasn't motivated by concern for my welfare but by her own selfish desires to maintain what she perceived as our family's social status. Discovering Catherine's betrayal about our wedding invitation was devastating enough, but it made me start questioning other mysterious events from my past. I spent the following weeks digging through old emails, social media accounts, and family communications, looking for patterns I had previously missed. The deeper I investigated, the more disturbing evidence I uncovered. Catherine had been systematically interfering with my life for years, always in ways subtle enough to appear accidental or coincidental. During my senior year of high school, I had applied to several prestigious engineering programs, including MIT and Stanford. I remembered being confused when neither school contacted me for interviews, despite my excellent grades and test scores. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, had seemed equally puzzled when I asked about the lack of response. Now, armed with adult perspective and determination to uncover the truth, I called Mrs. Patterson, who was still working at my old high school. She remembered me clearly and agreed to check her files from that year. "Roger, this is strange," she said when she called me back. "I have records showing that both MIT and Stanford tried to contact you multiple times for interviews. But there are notes in your file indicating that your sister Catherine called our office claiming you had decided not to pursue those applications because you weren't serious about engineering." My stomach turned as Mrs. Patterson continued reading from her files. Catherine had apparently contacted the schools directly as well, explaining that I was having family problems and emotional difficulties that would make me unsuitable for their demanding programs. She had presented herself as a concerned older sister, trying to prevent me from embarrassing myself. The pattern continued through college. During my sophomore year at the University of Illinois, I had been dating a wonderful girl named Sarah Mitchell from my thermodynamics class. Sarah was brilliant, funny, and shared my passion for sustainable design. We had been together for 8 months, and were talking seriously about our future, when she suddenly broke up with me through a brief text message. I had been devastated and confused by Sarah's abrupt departure, especially since she refused to explain her reasons or discuss the situation in person. She avoided me on campus for the rest of the semester, and transferred to a different university that fall. Now I tracked down Sarah through social media and reached out to her, explaining what I had discovered about Catherine's interference in my life. Sarah agreed to meet me for coffee when I was visiting Chicago, and her revelations left me speechless. "Roger, I'm so sorry about what happened," Sarah said, stirring sugar into her latte with shaking hands. "I believed your sister when she told me you were seeing someone else. Catherine called me repeatedly during finals week, claiming you had confided in her about wanting to break up with me but not knowing how to do it kindly. She said you were embarrassed about dating someone from my background because your family had higher expectations for you. Catherine told me she was trying to spare both of us additional pain by encouraging me to end things before you had to do it yourself." I felt sick listening to Sarah describe Catherine's manipulative lies. My sister had destroyed a relationship that might have led to marriage, using the same social class arguments she had later employed against Emily. But Catherine's interference hadn't stopped with my romantic relationships. I discovered she had also sabotaged professional opportunities throughout my career. During my first job out of college, I was scheduled to give an important presentation to potential clients about a sustainable office building design. The morning of the presentation, I received a frantic call from my supervisor saying my family had contacted the company claiming there was a medical emergency requiring my immediate return to Chicago. I had rushed home, only to find my family confused about why I thought there was an emergency. Everyone was perfectly fine, and nobody had called my workplace. By the time I returned to work, the client meeting had been rescheduled with another architect, and I lost the opportunity to advance my career with that project. Now I understood that Catherine had made that emergency call, deliberately timing it to interfere with my professional progress. She had been careful to provide just enough vague details about a family crisis to convince my employer without creating verifiable facts that could be traced back to her. The sabotage had continued when I was applying to graduate school for my master's degree in structural engineering. I had been accepted to several programs, but my parents seemed reluctant to provide financial support for additional education. Dad kept saying my engineering career was already impractical, and that I should consider more stable fields like business or finance. I called my academic advisor from college, Professor Williams, who had written recommendation letters for my graduate applications. He still remembered our conversations about my academic goals and was happy to discuss my graduate school experience. "Roger, I'm glad you called," Professor Williams said. "I've always wondered how things worked out for you. Your sister contacted me several times during your application process, expressing concerns about your commitment to engineering. She seemed to think you were only pursuing graduate school to delay entering the real world, and that you lacked the maturity for advanced academic work." I sat in stunned silence as Professor Williams continued. "Catherine suggested that I emphasize in my recommendation letters that you might be better suited for practical work rather than research-oriented graduate study. I didn't follow her suggestions, but I have to admit her comments made me question whether I was accurately assessing your dedication to the field." Catherine had been systematically undermining my academic and professional reputation for years, always positioning herself as a concerned family member while secretly working to limit my opportunities for success. She seemed determined to ensure that she remained the star of our family by sabotaging my potential achievements. I began reaching out to old friends from high school and college, asking if they remembered any unusual interactions with Catherine during important periods of my life. The responses were disturbing and consistent. My high school friend Jake Reynolds remembered Catherine approaching him at a family barbecue, asking detailed questions about my study habits and social life. She had seemed particularly interested in any problems I might be having with grades or relationships. At the time, Jake thought Catherine was just being a caring older sister, but now he realized she was gathering ammunition for future interference. My college roommate David Park recalled several phone calls from Catherine during exam periods, when she would call our dorm room claiming to need urgent information about my schedule or whereabouts. David had always passed along her messages, not realizing that Catherine was using the information to time her sabotage efforts for maximum impact. Even more disturbing, I discovered that Catherine had been manipulating our family's financial support throughout my college years. She had convinced our parents that I was irresponsible with money and didn't deserve the same level of financial assistance she had received during her education. I found old bank records showing that my parents had reduced my college support by several $1,000s during my junior year, forcing me to take on additional student loans and work longer hours at my campus job. This had directly impacted my grades and limited my ability to participate in extracurricular activities that could have enhanced my career prospects. Catherine had orchestrated all of these setbacks while positioning herself as the responsible, successful daughter who deserved increasing investment from our parents. She had been playing a long-term game of family politics, systematically eliminating me as competition for resources and parental attention. The most painful discovery was finding Catherine's old journal in a box she had stored in our parents' basement. Emily had come with me to Chicago for this investigation, and she was the one who found the leather-bound notebook hidden beneath Catherine's high school yearbooks. The journal entries, written during my senior year of college, laid out Catherine's strategy in chilling detail. She had been methodically planning ways to redirect family resources and attention to more deserving recipient, meaning herself. The journal revealed that she had been secretly recording family conversations for years, gathering information she could use to manipulate situations to her advantage. One entry from December made my blood run cold. "Roger's relationship with Sarah is getting serious. Need to intervene before parents start thinking about supporting another wedding. We'll contact Sarah directly and explain why this match isn't suitable for our family's reputation." Another entry from the following spring detailed her plans to undermine my graduate school applications, contacted Roger's professors to express concerns about his commitment, also spoke with Dad about the financial impracticality of graduate school during family dinner, need to guide parents toward more reasonable expectations for Roger's future. Catherine had been documenting her manipulation of my life like a military campaign, complete with strategies, timelines, and assessment of results. She viewed my happiness and success as threats to her own position in the family hierarchy. Armed with overwhelming evidence of Catherine's systematic sabotage, I decided to confront my parents with the truth. Emily encouraged me to approach the situation carefully, suggesting we present the evidence calmly and allow my parents time to process what they were learning. I arranged to meet Mom and Dad at their house in suburban Chicago during a weekend when Catherine would be traveling for work. I brought copies of the journal entries, documentation from the postal investigation, and written statements from people Catherine had contacted over the years. Dad answered the door looking older than I remembered, his hair now completely gray and his shoulders slightly stooped. Mom greeted us warmly, hugging Emily and apologizing again for missing our wedding. Their genuine affection made what I had to tell them even more difficult. We sat in their familiar living room, surrounded by family photographs that told the story of Catherine's favored position throughout our childhood. She appeared in prominently displayed portraits, receiving academic awards, graduating from college, getting promoted at work. Pictures of me were smaller and less prominently placed, usually showing me in the background during family gatherings. "I need to show you something that's going to be very difficult to hear," I began, spreading Catherine's journal entries across their coffee table. "Catherine has been deliberately sabotaging my life for years, including destroying my wedding invitation to prevent you from attending the ceremony." Mom's initial reaction was complete disbelief. She picked up the journal pages with trembling hands, scanning Catherine's handwriting with growing confusion. "Roger, this can't be right," she said. "Catherine would never do such things. She's always been so protective of our family, so concerned about making good decisions." I showed them the postal delivery records, the statements from my professors and former girlfriend, and the documented evidence of Catherine's phone calls to my workplace. Each piece of evidence built a compelling case, but Mom continued to resist accepting what was directly in front of her. "There has to be some explanation," Mom insisted. "Maybe Catherine was trying to help in ways we don't understand. She's always been so mature, so good at seeing the bigger picture." Dad's reaction was different, but equally disappointing. He sat silently throughout my presentation, occasionally nodding, but avoiding eye contact. When I finished explaining everything, he cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Roger, your sister has always been successful at everything she's tried," he said carefully. "Maybe her methods weren't perfect, but she's always had good intentions for our family." I realized that my parents had been so invested in Catherine's success story that they couldn't bear to acknowledge how that success had been built on undermining me. They had enabled her behavior by consistently rewarding her achievements without questioning how those achievements were obtained. The conversation grew more heated as I pressed them to acknowledge the evidence. Mom became defensive, listing all of Catherine's accomplishments and suggesting that I was jealous of her success. Dad retreated into uncomfortable silence, clearly wanting the confrontation to end. "She's getting married to Travis Hamilton," Mom said, as if that achievement somehow justified Catherine's past behavior. "Do you know what kind of opportunity that represents for our entire family? Travis comes from one of Chicago's most respected investment families." I felt like I was talking to a wall. My parents were so dazzled by Catherine's upcoming marriage to wealth and social status that they couldn't see the damage she had inflicted on their other child. Emily tried to help by gently explaining how hurt we had been by their absence from our wedding. She described her excitement about becoming part of their family and her confusion about why our invitation had been ignored. But even Emily's sincere emotions couldn't penetrate my parents' denial about Catherine's true nature. As we prepared to leave their house, I realized that Catherine had been building her manipulation campaign for years. She had positioned herself as the golden child whose success reflected well on our parents, while simultaneously portraying me as the problematic son whose choices embarrassed the family. My parents had become emotionally invested in maintaining that narrative because it validated their favoritism and excused their neglect of my achievements. Admitting Catherine's manipulation would have forced them to confront their own failures as parents. Catherine's engagement to Travis Hamilton had only strengthened her position within the family power structure. Travis came from generational wealth, his father owning Hamilton Investment Partners, one of Chicago's most established financial firms. The upcoming wedding represented everything my parents valued: social status, financial security, and prestigious connections. Our family had committed $50,000 to Catherine's wedding budget, money that had never been offered for my education or other life events. The ceremony was planned for the Palmer House Hilton with 310 guests, many of whom were Travis's business associates and social connections. I tried reaching out to extended family members, hoping they might be more objective about Catherine's behavior. My efforts were met with polite dismissal and subtle suggestions that I was experiencing sibling rivalry or adjustment difficulties related to my recent marriage. Aunt Margaret, Dad's sister, listened patiently to my concerns but ultimately sided with Catherine. She reminded me that Catherine had always been special and suggested that I should be proud of my sister's success rather than trying to diminish it. Uncle Paul, Mom's brother, was even more direct in his dismissal. He told me that family loyalty meant supporting Catherine's wedding celebration rather than stirring up drama with old grievances. He seemed to view my evidence as irrelevant compared to the excitement of Catherine's upcoming society wedding. Catherine had apparently been preparing for my eventual resistance by preemptively discrediting me to extended family members. She had been telling relatives that I was struggling with mental health issues related to my recent marriage and career stress. She portrayed my accusations as symptoms of instability rather than legitimate grievances. This preemptive character assassination was devastatingly effective. Family members who might have been willing to listen to my concerns instead approached me with pity and suggestions that I seek professional counseling. They had been primed to interpret my evidence as delusions rather than facts. When Emily and I visited Chicago for a family gathering, the treatment she received was notably cold. Relatives who had been welcoming during phone conversations became distant and formal in person. Several family members made pointed comments about adjustment periods in marriage and the importance of supporting family harmony. Emily handled the rejection with grace, but I could see how much it hurt her. She had hoped to build genuine relationships with my extended family, and instead she was being treated as an unwelcome outsider who had somehow corrupted my judgment. My isolation within the family was becoming complete. Catherine had successfully positioned herself as the victim of my jealous attacks, while portraying herself as the successful daughter who was bringing honor to our family name. Every attempt I made to expose her manipulation was reinterpreted as evidence of my own character flaws. The discovery that shattered my remaining illusions came when I was going through more of Catherine's stored belongings in my parents' basement. Hidden in an old shoebox, I found a collection of financial documents that revealed the true scope of her deception. Catherine had been borrowing money from elderly relatives throughout our extended family, using forged documents with my name and signature. She had accumulated nearly $30,000 in fraudulent debt, telling our older relatives that I was struggling financially and needed their help but was too proud to ask directly. Aunt Dorothy, my grandmother's 90-year-old sister, had loaned Catherine $15,000 that was supposedly for my student loan payments. Uncle Frank, Dad's elderly brother, had provided $8,000 for what Catherine claimed were my medical bills after a fictional car accident. Cousin Helen had contributed $5,000 for my supposed business investment that Catherine said I was too embarrassed to discuss with immediate family. Each loan had been accompanied by Catherine's tearful explanations about my financial struggles and her promise to coordinate the assistance discreetly to preserve my dignity. She had forged my signature on promissory notes and provided fake contact information so the lenders couldn't verify the loans directly with me. This financial fraud represented a new level of criminal behavior that went far beyond family manipulation. Catherine had been literally stealing money from elderly relatives while destroying my reputation and relationships throughout our extended family network. Catherine's wedding day arrived with the pomp and ceremony befitting Chicago society's event of the season. The Palmer House Hilton had been transformed into an elegant showcase, with white roses and gold accents reflecting the Hamilton family's old money aesthetics. 310 guests filled the ballroom, representing a who's who of Chicago's business and social elite. Emily had remained in Portland for a scheduled work commitment at the hospital, which was probably for the best. The family dynamics at this wedding would have been too painful for her to witness. I attended alone, wearing my best suit, and trying to maintain emotional composure despite everything I now knew about Catherine's true nature. Watching my family celebrate Catherine's triumph felt like being trapped in an alternate reality. Mom fluttered around the reception beaming with pride, introducing Catherine to important guests and basking in reflected glory from the Hamilton family's wealth and status. Dad stood straighter than I had seen in years, clearly enjoying his role as father of the bride in such prestigious surroundings. Catherine looked stunning in her designer wedding gown, a creation that had cost more than most people's cars. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting congratulations and playing the role of perfect bride with consummate skill. To outside observers, She appeared to be everything a successful young woman should be. Beautiful, accomplished, marrying well, and surrounded by family support. The contrast between this celebration and my own intimate wedding could not have been more stark. While Emily and I had exchanged vows surrounded by 50 guests in a botanical garden, Catherine was being feted by hundreds of Chicago's most influential people in one of the city's most exclusive venues. Travis Hamilton seemed like a decent man, though clearly naive about his new wife's capacity for deception. He gazed at Catherine with genuine adoration, completely unaware that he had married someone capable of systematic manipulation and fraud. During their first dance, I felt genuinely sorry for him. Mom's toast to the happy couple was a masterpiece of maternal pride and social positioning. She spoke eloquently about Catherine's achievements, her wisdom in choosing such a wonderful partner, and the bright future that awaited the young couple. The toast received enthusiastic applause from guests who clearly viewed this as the perfect society wedding. I found myself observing the family dynamics with new understanding. Extended relatives competed for Catherine's attention, eager to associate themselves with her success. The same people who had dismissed my concerns about Catherine's behavior were now positioning themselves for maximum benefit from her connection to the Hamilton family wealth. Cousin Patricia, who had refused to listen to my evidence about Catherine's manipulation, was now gushing about how proud she was to be related to such an accomplished young woman. Uncle Robert, who had suggested I seek therapy for my delusions, was enthusiastically networking with Travis's business associates. The hypocrisy was nauseating, but it also revealed how completely Catherine had succeeded in her long-term strategy. She had positioned herself as the family success story, while systematically undermining my relationships and opportunities. Tonight was her victory celebration, and every smile and congratulation validated the effectiveness of her manipulation. During the cocktail hour, I attempted to have quiet conversations with several family members, hoping that the celebratory atmosphere might make them more receptive to hearing the truth about Catherine's financial fraud. These efforts were met with polite but firm resistance. "This isn't the time or place for family disagreements," Aunt Margaret whispered when I tried to show her documents about the fraudulent loans. "Catherine deserves to enjoy her special day without any drama." The message was clear. Protecting Catherine's wedding celebration was more important than addressing serious criminal behavior. My family had chosen to prioritize social appearances over moral accountability. As the evening progressed, I realized that direct confrontation would never work. Catherine had spent years building her reputation as the perfect daughter, and my family was too invested in that narrative to abandon it based on evidence alone. I needed a different strategy, one that would force them to confront the truth in a way they couldn't dismiss or ignore. I began planning my approach carefully, knowing I would only have one opportunity to break through their denial. The key was timing and presentation. I needed to wait for the perfect moment when Catherine's guard was down and the family was gathered together in a way that would make private dismissal impossible. That moment came during Mom's champagne toast near the end of the reception. The ballroom had quieted as guests gathered around the head table, and Mom was speaking from the heart about her pride in Catherine's accomplishments. The atmosphere was warm and intimate despite the grand surroundings. I positioned myself near the family table and discreetly activated the recording function on my phone. Whatever happened next, I wanted documentation that couldn't be disputed later. I also made sure Emily would have evidence of how this confrontation unfolded, since she had supported me through this entire investigation. When Mom finished her toast and turned to me with that familiar question about when I would have my own wedding, I knew the moment had arrived. The champagne glass in her hand, the expectant faces of 300 guests, the perfect facade of family harmony. It was all about to crumble. 7 months ago, Mom, you were invited. Your favorite daughter threw the invitation in the trash. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine's face went white as she realized her years of careful manipulation were about to be exposed in the most public way possible. Mom's champagne glass slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking crystal. But what happened next surprised everyone, including me. The ballroom doors opened and Emily walked in, accompanied by a man in a formal suit who was clearly not a wedding guest. She had flown to Chicago after all, bringing with her something I hadn't expected. "Roger," Emily called across the suddenly quiet ballroom. I think everyone should meet Special Agent David Martinez from the United States Postal Inspection Service. He has some questions about mail fraud and financial crimes. Catherine's perfectly orchestrated wedding reception was about to become the setting for her downfall. The Palmer House ballroom erupted into chaos as Emily approached our table with Special Agent Martinez. 310 wedding guests turned to stare as the federal postal inspector presented his credentials and asked to speak with Catherine about mail fraud charges. Catherine's face had gone beyond white to an ashen gray that made her elaborate wedding makeup look garish by contrast. Travis stepped protectively closer to his new bride, confusion and alarm evident in his expression as he tried to understand what was happening during their reception. "Mrs. Hamilton," Agent Martinez said formally, using Catherine's newly married name, "we need to discuss your destruction of United States mail and your use of fraudulent documents to obtain money from elderly relatives." Mom dropped into her chair as if her legs had given out, staring at Catherine with growing horror. Dad stood frozen beside the head table, his mouth opening and closing without producing any words. The assembled family members pressed closer, straining to hear what was being said. Emily moved to my side, her presence providing strength I desperately needed for what was about to unfold. She handed me a thick folder containing additional evidence she and Agent Martinez had compiled over the past several weeks. "I've been working with federal investigators ever since you discovered Catherine's journal," Emily explained quietly. "The Postal Service takes mail fraud very seriously, especially when it's combined with financial crimes targeting elderly victims." Agent Martinez opened his briefcase and spread documents across the white linen tablecloth where Catherine's wedding cake had been displayed moments earlier. The evidence included photocopies of forged promissory notes, bank records showing illegal transfers, and testimony from elderly relatives who had been deceived into providing loans. "Your sister has been operating a sophisticated fraud scheme," Agent Martinez explained to me while Catherine sat in stunned silence. "She destroyed federal mail to prevent family members from attending your wedding, and she used forged documents bearing your name to steal approximately $30,000 from elderly relatives." Travis Hamilton finally found his voice, his face reflecting shock and betrayal that mirrored my own emotions from months earlier. "Catherine, what is he talking about? What forged documents?" The answer came not from Catherine, but from our extended family members who had begun gathering around the head table. Aunt Dorothy, my grandmother's 90-year-old sister, spoke up in her quavering voice. "Catherine told me Roger needed $15,000 for student loan payments," she said, confusion evident in her tired eyes. "She showed me papers with his signature asking for help. She said he was too proud to ask family directly." Uncle Frank nodded agreement, his face reddening with embarrassment and anger. "She got $8,000 from me for Roger's medical bills after what she said was a serious car accident. The promissory note had Roger's signature, but if Roger didn't know about the loan..." More family members began speaking up, each sharing their own story of Catherine's deception. Cousin Helen had provided $5,000 for a fictional business investment. Aunt Beverly had contributed $3,000 for supposed emergency home repairs. The pattern of lies and forged documents was overwhelming. Travis Hamilton's wedding reception had transformed into a public trial, with his new wife revealed as a criminal who had been systematically defrauding their own elderly relatives. His investment banker background made him immediately understand the legal and financial implications of what was being disclosed. "Catherine, how could you do this?" he demanded, his voice carrying a mixture of betrayal and disgust. "How could you steal from your own family?" But Catherine's response wasn't remorse or confession. Instead, she attempted one final desperate manipulation, turning toward me with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Roger made me do it," she cried, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "He's been pressuring me for money for years, threatening to hurt himself if I didn't help him. I was trying to protect him by getting money without him having to humiliate himself by asking directly. It was a masterful performance, designed to portray herself as a victim of my manipulation rather than the perpetrator of systematic fraud." For a moment, some family members seemed uncertain about whom to believe. That's when our wedding photographer, Sarah Chen, stepped forward with evidence that destroyed Catherine's final lie. Sarah had been documenting the reception and had overheard Catherine's confession to her maid of honor during wedding preparation. I recorded several hours of audio during wedding preparation, Sarah announced, holding up her digital recorder. Mrs. Hamilton admitted to destroying wedding invitations and planning financial fraud. She specifically discussed her strategy for blaming these crimes on her brother, if she was ever caught. Agent Martinez accepted the audio recording as evidence, and Sarah played the relevant portions for the assembled family. Catherine's voice came through clearly, as she bragged to her maid of honor about her manipulation tactics. Roger never suspected I destroyed his wedding invitation, Catherine's recorded voice explained. And if anyone ever questions the family loans, I'll just say, he pressured me into helping him. Who would they believe? The successful daughter or the struggling son? The audio recording was devastating. It revealed not only Catherine's criminal behavior, but also her complete lack of remorse about destroying my wedding day and defrauding elderly relatives. Her calculated cruelty was exposed for everyone to hear. Travis Hamilton immediately stood up from the head table, his face reflecting disgust and betrayal. "I cannot be married to someone capable of such deception," he announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Catherine, our marriage is over before it begins." He removed his wedding ring and placed it on the table beside the evidence of his wife's crimes, then walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Several of his family members followed, their expressions showing shock and embarrassment at being associated with such a scandal. Mom was sobbing openly now, her carefully planned society wedding collapsing into public humiliation. Dad remained frozen in place, unable to process how quickly their golden daughter had been revealed as a criminal. Catherine made one final attempt at manipulation, reaching toward Agent Martinez with trembling hands. "Please, you don't understand the pressure I've been under," she pleaded. "My family expects so much from me." I was trying to protect everyone by handling these problems quietly, but Agent Martinez was unmoved by her performance. He had seen countless white-collar criminals attempt similar emotional manipulation during arrest procedures. "Mrs. Hamilton, you are under arrest for mail fraud, wire fraud, and elder abuse," he announced formally. "You have the right to remain silent." As he read Catherine her rights, wedding guests began filing out of the ballroom in shocked silence. The society event of the season had become a crime scene, with the bride being arrested during her own reception. The photographer captured everything, including the moment when Catherine was led away in handcuffs, her designer wedding gown trailing behind her as she was escorted through the Palmer House lobby. The images would become evidence in her federal prosecution. 310 guests witnessed Catherine's arrest, ensuring that her crimes would become Chicago society gossip for years to come. The Hamilton family's reputation was damaged by association, and Travis's decision to immediately annul the marriage was the only way to protect his family's financial interests. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom watching Catherine accept a plea agreement for mail fraud, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse. She had traded her designer wedding gown for a standard orange jumpsuit, and her carefully styled hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail that revealed the gray roots she had always hidden with expensive salon treatments. The judge sentenced Catherine to 2 years probation, 800 hours of community service, and full financial restitution to the elderly relatives she had defrauded. She was also required to participate in court-mandated psychological counseling to address her manipulation and fraud behaviors. Travis Hamilton had successfully obtained an annulment of their marriage within 30 days of the wedding reception arrest. His family's legal team had worked efficiently to ensure no financial assets were commingled before Catherine's criminal behavior was exposed. He expressed private relief that the fraud was discovered before children or significant property were involved. My parents had spent the months since Catherine's arrest attending family therapy sessions court ordered as part of her sentencing agreement. The therapist, Dr. Rachel Morrison, specialized in family systems disrupted by criminal behavior and long-term manipulation patterns. "Roger, we owe you an apology that can never fully address the damage we've caused," Mom said during our first joint therapy session. "We enabled Catherine's behavior for years by rewarding her success, without questioning how that success was achieved. Dad's admission was even more difficult for him to express. I suspected Catherine was manipulating situations to her advantage," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I chose to ignore the warning signs because her achievements made me feel successful as a father. I failed both of my children by not protecting you from her sabotage. The therapy process was painful, but necessary for rebuilding any kind of functional family relationship. Dr. Morrison helped my parents understand how their favoritism had created a toxic dynamic that encouraged Catherine's criminal behavior while damaging my emotional development and opportunities. Emily attended several therapy sessions with me, graciously accepting my parents' apologies for missing our wedding and for the years of coldness she had experienced from our family. Her forgiveness was more generous than they deserved, but it reflected the compassionate nature that had made me fall in love with her. Extended family members also came forward with their own apologies. Aunt Margaret admitted she had been swayed by Catherine's social success and had dismissed my concerns without proper consideration. Uncle Paul acknowledged that family loyalty should not have protected criminal behavior at the expense of victims. The financial restitution process required Catherine to liquidate most of her assets, including her expensive apartment and luxury possessions. She was forced to move back in with our parents while working a basic retail job to pay back the money she had stolen from elderly relatives. Her fall from Chicago society was swift and complete. The investment banking community was small and gossipy, and word of her arrest spread quickly through Travis's professional network. She was effectively blacklisted from the high-paying marketing positions she had previously held. Catherine's community service assignment involved working with elderly residents at a nursing home, where she was required to assist with daily care activities under strict supervision. The irony of someone who had defrauded elderly relatives being forced to serve elderly people was not lost on anyone involved in her sentencing. The most significant change came through Catherine's psychological counseling. Dr. Morrison referred her to a specialist in narcissistic personality disorders who worked with her to understand the destructive patterns behind her manipulation and fraud. 8 months into her probation period, Catherine sent me a handwritten letter from the rehabilitation program she was attending. The letter was different from any communication I had ever received from her. Roger, I need to acknowledge the terrible harm I caused you and Emily, she wrote in careful script that showed none of her former arrogance. I destroyed your wedding day, sabotaged your relationships and career opportunities, and committed crimes using your name. There is no excuse for my behavior, and I don't expect forgiveness. I am finally understanding through therapy that my need to be the favorite child led me to systematically attack your happiness and success. I told myself I was protecting our family's reputation, but the truth is I was protecting my own position as the golden child by undermining yours. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing specific incidents of sabotage and manipulation she was now able to acknowledge. She accepted full responsibility for her choices and expressed genuine remorse for the damage she had caused to multiple people over many years. I hope someday you and Emily can find peace knowing that justice was served and that I'm working to become someone capable of healthy relationships. You deserved a brother's support throughout your life, and instead I was your greatest obstacle. I shared the letter with Emily, and together we decided to respond with cautious optimism. We were willing to rebuild a relationship with Catherine if her changes proved genuine and lasting, but we would maintain appropriate boundaries to protect ourselves from future manipulation. The rebuilding process with my parents progressed more quickly. They demonstrated their commitment to change by attending weekly therapy sessions, apologizing publicly to family members who had witnessed Catherine's arrest, and taking financial responsibility for the money Catherine had stolen using my name. Dad used his retirement savings to immediately repay the elderly relatives Catherine had defrauded, ensuring they didn't have to wait for her slow restitution payments. Mom wrote personal letters to Emily's family, apologizing for their absence from our wedding and expressing hope for future relationships. Most importantly, my parents began treating Emily as a genuine daughter-in-law rather than an unwelcome intruder. They invited her family to visit Chicago for holidays, learned about her work with pediatric patients, and showed authentic interest in her background and achievements. Emily's parents, Bill and Martha Thompson, graciously welcomed my family to their Idaho farm for Thanksgiving. The contrast between Emily's humble, authentic family and my former pretentious social climbing could not have been more stark. My parents seemed genuinely impressed by the Thompson family's warmth and integrity. My career also benefited from the resolution of family chaos. With Catherine's interference finally ended, I was promoted to senior partner at my Portland engineering firm. The promotion came with opportunities to lead major sustainable building projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. Emily and I decided to renew our wedding vows on our second anniversary, this time with full family attendance. The ceremony took place at the same Portland Botanical Garden where we had originally married, but with a larger celebration that included both our families. Mom gave Emily her grandmother's antique wedding ring during the vow renewal ceremony, symbolically welcoming her into our family history. Dad walked me down the aisle, fulfilling the role he had missed during our original wedding. The photographer captured moments of genuine joy and reconciliation that contrasted sharply with the empty chairs from our first ceremony. Catherine remained in Chicago, continuing her rehabilitation program and working toward completing her community service requirements. She was not invited to our vow renewal, but she sent a congratulatory card, acknowledging our happiness and expressing hope for eventual healing. The experience taught me profound lessons about family dynamics, personal boundaries, and the difference between enabling harmful behavior and showing genuine love. I learned that confronting painful truths is essential for authentic relationships, even when that confrontation destroys comfortable illusions. Emily and I established new family traditions that honored both our backgrounds. We spent summers visiting her family's farm in Idaho, and winters hosting my parents in Portland. The holidays that had once been sources of tension became opportunities for genuine connection and shared experiences. Most importantly, I learned to value authenticity over social status, compassion over competition, and truth over comfortable deception. Catherine's systematic sabotage had been devastating, but it ultimately led me to build stronger, more honest relationships with the people who truly mattered. 2 years later, Emily and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Grace Thompson. My parents were attentive, loving grandparents who seemed determined to break the cycle of favoritism that had damaged their relationship with their own children. Catherine sent a baby gift with a note, saying she hoped to earn the right to be an aunt to Grace someday. Her rehabilitation seemed genuine, but we remained cautiously optimistic about future family relationships. The little girl who would grow up knowing both her potato farming grandparents and her Chicago grandparents, who would be taught to value kindness over status, and who would learn that real family loyalty means protecting each other rather than competing for position. As I held Grace for the first time, I realized that Catherine's betrayal had ultimately led me to everything truly important in life. Emily's love, my parents' genuine transformation, and now our beautiful daughter represented the authentic happiness that no amount of manipulation could have provided. The family we were building together was based on truth, mutual support, and unconditional love, rather than competition, deception, and conditional approval. Catherine's crimes had been exposed, justice had been served, and our real lives could finally begin. Have you ever experienced family favoritism that damaged relationships between siblings? Sometimes the people who are supposed to support us become our greatest obstacles. But confronting painful truths can lead to genuine healing and authentic connections. I'd love to hear your thoughts about family dynamics and how you've handled difficult relationships in your own life. Thank you for listening to my story about discovering the truth behind years of systematic sabotage and finding the courage to fight back against manipulation. If this resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Remember that your voice matters, your truth deserves to be heard, and authentic relationships are worth fighting for.